Today I'm going to talk about DLC in the video game industry. What is it? DLC is the short term for downloadable content that can be added to the content of a video game. So anytime you see a new Smash Brothers character or a new costume in a fighter game, it was most likely purchased by a player as DLC. This was how it was for a long time. Games would be released, and if you really liked them, game developers would create some additional content such as new levels, skins for your characters, or new characters completely. At the start, this DLC only added to the game, providing no real limitations for a player who just wanted the base game. Today in the present, much to the mass gaming community's frustration, DLC has become limiting in that base games have started to feel as though they are only partial. Games only feel complete once the majority of the available DLC has been purchased. Developers have reasonable explanations, but is this just developer greed or necessity for the industry? In this video, I'll be looking at both perspectives, the gamers and the developers. I'll also look at a recent game release that became a focal point for this controversy, the 2015 release of Star Wars Battlefront. Gamers have the perspective that DLC has become a necessary purchase if they want the complete experience. If that is the case, the frustration intensifies due to the fact that players feel as though they now have to pay much more than the usual $60 for a base game. Today, with DLC included, some games' prices go up anywhere from $80 to $110, and the frustration intensifies even more. Games like Evolve received terrible reception due to its overabundance of DLC. Without the DLC, gamers had very limited options in characters, weapons, and abilities. Developers argue that DLC is the way it is due to the increases in cost, in order to make the visually stunning and complex games that the overall community has come to expect. This explanation has merit, as it's not hard to see that a game like Last of Us probably required more cost to make than, let's say, Dead Island, which only came out 2 years before. A perfect example of this controversy can be found in the recently released 2015 version of Star Wars Battlefront. Before the game's release, there was an incredibly strong hype surrounding the next iteration of a beloved game series from the golden age of the PS2. When the first footage was released, many fans, myself included, were incredibly happy with the visual effects, sound, and mechanics that all had the beautiful aura of nostalgia. I confess, I cried a little bit from joy when I saw X-Wings in formation above, while Imperial walkers dominated the icy wastes of Hoth. However, the bad news emerged all too quickly, like the insidious coming of the Sith Lords. Players would only have access to a very small amount of weaponry, and only 4 planets to play on at the initial release. DLC packs would allow access to 4 more planets, new characters, and a larger weapons inventory. If that wasn't bad enough, the total amount for all of the packs was just under the price for the actual game itself. If a player wanted the total Battlefront experience, they would have to pay $110, instead of the $60 for the base game. To make matters even worse, each pack was released 2 to 3 months apart, meaning that the very last pack was released in December of 2016, almost a year after the game's initial release. Naturally, this entire situation angered gamers, believing that the high cost and long wait was unjust and not fair. Many also felt that having to wait a year for a DLC pack just wasn't worth it, as the majority of the hype had faded and many fans had moved on to other games. As for myself, I was frustrated, but still had the willingness to purchase them, since I am such a hardcore fan of the Star Wars franchise. For the average mainstream gamer, however, it's all too easy to see why this method of DLC release was less than appealing. So why does this issue matter so much? Isn't this just an inevitable process that gamers will have to deal with? It seems as though if gamers were to protest more than they currently are, the protest would go in a direction where there's just the demand for lower cost for each individual game. This attempt to sway developers to lower costs probably wouldn't work, but let's say that it did. If developers decided to lower prices on DLC, there would be a good chance that costs would have to be cut elsewhere. These cuts would have an effect on the game's overall quality, either in lacking visuals, or shorter production times, and so on and so forth. The point is, would gamers really want a lower price if it meant underdeveloped games were the result? In order for DLC to be met with a better reception by gamers, a few things need to happen. First, gamers need to be accepting of the fact that DLC is here to stay in whatever form. It has become a huge part of the marketing and sales strategies for developers, and is unlikely to just disappear due to frustrations about high cost, especially when lots of people are still willing to pay that cost. Second, the argument should not be about cost to begin with. It should be about the content of the DLC. Gamers should be asking developers to change the content of DLC so that any DLC being offered only serves to be additional content. The base game should not feel lacking or limited if DLC is not present, like with Star Wars Battlefront. If these things happen, the end result is that DLC will be received a little bit better by gamers, and developers will still receive what they need to make quality products. In this way, there could be a new hope for the gaming community and for the industry.